Hey, this is Idea Coach. It's the Coach He's Wrong. Weighing in on the weight classes, episode 19A. This is the preview to both StrikeForce 40, which is the final for the StrikeForce Heavyweight Grand Prix, and UFC FUEL 3. Let's get into the picks. StrikeForce Lightweight Championship bout. The challenger, Josh Thompson, versus the champion, Gilbert Melendez. There is no fighter more deserving of a UFC contract than Gilbert Melendez today, even more so than Nick Diaz. He has the striking, the strategy, the ground game, the conditioning to take any lightweight fighter to the limit. He's going to be facing off against his longtime rival, Josh Thompson. And I feel bad for discounting Josh Thompson in this fight. I mean, win-loss record, he's been doing actually rather well for himself, except for that stumble with Tetsuya Kawajiri, which was a fight he took on 3 weeks' notice, and it was an overseas fight. He's just not as consistent as he needs to be. And when I say consistent, I don't mean having a consistent good performance in his fights. I mean consistently fighting. He has had no more than 2 fights a year since 2006. And if you take the elite lightweight fighters from 2006 and you bring them over today, it's a completely different landscape. I'm sorry, but I just don't see him getting the W with Gilbert Melendez. StrikeForce Heavyweight Grand Prix Final. Daniel Cormier versus Josh Barnett. Well, it's taken over a year to get here. A year and a half if you count the announcement hype back in late 2010. I don't need to tell anyone that's been following MMA since that time that this was, on paper, the best Grand Prix of all time that somehow became the worst. From Fedor's faltering that denied the fans Fedor versus Overeem, to Overeem being forced out of the Grand Prix by Zuffa to prevent the ring's aura from being damaged, only to have that happen anyway with his recent off-the-charts testosterone test results. Now we are left with a replacement fighter and a catch wrestler that has pissed hot 3 times already. Daniel Cormier will be exchanging leather and ground tactics with the babyface assassin Josh Barnett. Daniel is a highly decorated wrestler who stopped the rise of Bigfoot Silva in the semifinals of this Grand Prix with a clean knockout. But within that fight, he showed some terrible footwork and placements of hands in the short times that he was defending himself. Say what you want about Barnett. He is an intelligent fighter that picks his shots accordingly. I don't see him playing into the firefight of the pocket like Jeff Monson did when most of us were introduced to Daniel. I went back to look up some old fights of Cormier, and I know that he has a wrestling to be a success. But the lack of experience and dare I say, the lack of MMA wrestling will prevent him from victory against the War Master. UFC lightweight bout. Donald Cerrone versus Jeremy Stephens. Well, the last time that Cerrone was in the octagon, he allowed his emotions to get the better of him. This time around, he's in a much lower stress fight against Jeremy the Heathen Stephens. It is safe to say at this point that Stephens is just there to put on a good show rather than elevate his career. Not because of his recent win-loss record, it's how he wins and how he loses. Having 3 out of his last 5 fights goes to the split decision is an indicator that he is comfy at letting the judges handle his fights. It's as if he's satisfied with just the performance rather than the win, which is not a good look for a relatively young fighter such as himself. In a lot of ways, this is similar to Mark Hominick and the Eddie Yagan fight at UFC 145, where the favorite was coming off a loss and was given a rather easy fight on paper. But I don't think that the upset bug is going to bite twice this soon. Whether or not Cerrone will finish Jeremy, who is difficult to finish, will not be a question or a concern. I doubt that the Cowboy will have the nerves and emotions rattling him for this bout. Expect Donald to chip away at the Heathen and land the occasional big shots for the win. UFC featherweight bout. Chan Sung Jung versus Dustin Poirier. The Korean Zombie has been a steadily improving fighter. One of the rare Asian imports has been facing heavier competition and actually doing better as his career progresses. There was a filling out period for Jung at the start of his stateside career, but wins over Mark Hominick and his spectacular submission win and the rematch against Leonard Garcia propels him high in the rankings. Which in some ways makes this fight interesting as he faces an opponent that holds a better record but to lesser competition. I can't remember if Dustin Poirier has ever been on the main card of a UFC event, But due to the fickleness of the featherweight division, I guess this fight makes sense because Diamond Dustin has finished his last 2 challengers and is now 5-1 under Zuffa. To accurately call this fight, I had to go on various MMA websites that stream fight footage on Dustin. On the surface, I saw nothing that gives me a concrete reason that the zombie will lose this fight. However, I have an irking feeling that this fight will be harder than what it should be. At this point, Dustin is already a winner, going from the undercard to the main event. Junk has lost fights that he should not have before, and he has a tendency to get a little too wild and loose with his hands. That said, I can't see Dustin submitting or knocking out the Korean zombie. And I don't feel that Diamond Dustin has the wrestling to hold him down either. I got Chan Sung Jung winning this one. Okay, so let me run down my picks. In StrikeForce, I have Josh Barnett, Gilbert Melendez, and I forgot to mention this, Fei Zhao will be facing off against Mike Kyle, and I'm picking him. For those who don't know, this is actually a rematch. I was under the impression that Mike Kyle faced Babalu, and so I looked it up on Wikipedia and found out that these two fought before. I don't see what Mike Kyle would offer Fei Zhao at this point. And to be honest with you, with this being the second rematch on the main card of StrikeForce 40, it kind of pretty much indicates that the organization itself is in shambles, and that Zuffa is just keeping this alive because of the Showtime deal that was inked prior to them buying out StrikeForce. Over in the UFC, you have Don Cerrone beating Jeremy the Heathen Stevens, and the Korean Zombie defeating Diamond Dustin. Let me go and talk about a couple of things in Bellator. Michael Chandler faced Akihiro Gono and knocked him, technically knocked him out in 59 seconds, I believe. I felt it was a very early stoppage. Akihiro Gono was defending himself intelligently, but the referee stopped it and he called it. From the angles I saw, Gono was still in the fight, but yes, he was losing. Also, there's been a couple of upsets going on lately, with Kuzma Parharas losing to Alan Bletcher and Eddie Yagan defeating Mark Hominick. And with both UFC FUEL 3 and StrikeForce 40, the Grand Prix final, these are very, very losable fights. So perhaps this could be like the new 2007, where the MMA landscape is changing a little bit. Other than that, guys, if there's any other major upsets, I'll be talking about and when on the Weight Classes episode 19B. Take care.